break. I'd like to introduce Heather Gilbert, who's the National Forest Research Manager. She's going to talk to us about the importance of baseline selection with case studies from the National Forest. So take it away, Heather.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Okay, just to confirm everyone can see my screen then, and then I will get started. Great, so thank you very much. First of all, thank you to the GLNP team for inviting me to speak today. As was mentioned, I am the Research and Evidence Manager for the National Forest, and today I'm going to be talking about the importance of baselining and collecting baseline data. So as I'm sure the majority of you will be aware, baseline data is any data that are collected prior to an intervention taking place. And when I'm talking about interventions here, this can be anything from active planting, so tree planting, for instance, or it can be a change in agricultural method, or it could be actually a passive intervention like the rewilding stuff that was talked about previously. So intervention here, I'm not necessarily meaning it has to be something active. It's anything that you're expecting to make a change across the habitats and landscape. And collecting these data is important in order to provide a base from which those changes that you're expecting can be monitored. So you can actually see how things are changing over time. And there's a number of different reasons why collecting baseline data is important. And first and foremost, the most kind of practical reason is just meeting regulatory and funding requirements. So depending on what you're working with and who you're working with and who's funding it, there are various levels of requirements of information that's needed at the outset before you can get started. So it's important to always take a minute to just check what those requirements are before getting too far into your planning. But then importantly, it provides a basis for progress reporting. So it allows you to understand your project and how it's developing, not only internally, but then to be able to communicate that to stakeholders and the general public. And when you're working on projects that have an impact on lots of different people, it's important to keep them updated. And by having baseline data you can compare to, it really helps with that. And then it also helps to actually assess the project needs. So there could be situations where you think you know what's going on, and then you go and do a detailed collection of baseline data, and you find actually there are different species involved that you weren't aware were there, or you might want to change your intervention slightly depending on the data that comes in. So it can be really helpful for project design as well. So the baselining process has several different stages. So first of all, it's kind of a start at the end situation by identifying the drivers and objectives. So what are your overall objectives for the project? And then take those back to be like, okay, if my objective is to increase biodiversity, then I need to baseline data collect on biodiversity. Then you want to define your study area. And this may seem very simple because it's just the area that you're working with. But if you're working with a very large area, you may need to be selective about the areas you actually collect data on. Or it's possible that your interventions are having effects outside of the area you're directly working in. So things like water quality, for instance, you might want to measure that further downstream as well to see if it's having knock-on effects. Then you perform any desk-based surveys. So obviously nowadays there's loads of information that you can get just from your computer. So things like mapping to get sort of broad habitat classifications. You can contact your local environmental records centres to see what records already exist for the area. And that will help you to then plan and design your fieldwork programme. And make sure that you're collecting data that's going to be useful for you. Then it's about consulting the stakeholders. Again, this is to a lesser or greater degree, depending on the project and how it's managed. But if there are multiple stakeholders involved, this is a really key step. Then, of course, you want to implement your surveys and, importantly, analyse and communicate the results of that. So making sure you have an accurate representation of what's there that can be communicated. If project managers further down the line want to look back, it's in a comprehensible form. One of the big difficulties with baseline data is actually choosing the right measure. And as I mentioned, it is really dependent on the desired outcome of the intervention. But one of the things that a lot of organisations and a lot of conservation groups and projects are looking at is this sort of more holistic approach. So yes, the direct interventions you might be putting in place might affect things like soil condition or biodiversity, carbon storage in the local area. It's also likely to be having knock-on effects to things like the local economy or societal effects, you know, improving access for local people to green spaces, for instance. And so it's important to think around the problem to see all of the different things that might be involved. And this schematic that you can see here is one that the National Forest is in the process of developing. So we're still at the consultation stage. This is by no means a final scheme for what we're going to collect, but it's just a starter of all the different aspects that we're looking at across the entire National Forest. And so what I'm going to do now is talk to you a little bit more about that and about how we implement baseline data and the monitoring across the National Forest. So for those of you who may be unaware of who we are and what we do, we are an area of around about 200 square miles, almost slap bang in the centre of the country. So kind of snuggled in between Derby, Leicester and Birmingham. So it spans 3 counties, 6 districts and 2 regions. So as you can imagine, we have very different challenges in terms of project development and project management across that whole area than a single site such as Ken Hill might have. Not to say we have more challenges, just very different challenges because of the scope of the people that we're working with. When the project was started back in kind of the mid-90s, it was one of the least wooded areas of the UK. And the reason for that was because it's got a very, very strong history of coal mining and clay working. So it was an incredibly scarred landscape. And so when this idea of creating a kind of exemplar national forest was put forward, this area was a clear contender because it really needed not just the environmental regeneration, but also the economic regeneration for the area with kind of the closure of the mines and all that kind of thing. So there was really strong local support for developing a new environmentally forward-looking area across this region. And we're about 25 years in now. And I've actually just started setting out a new 25-year vision. And this is a vision that addresses climate change mitigation and adaptation, again, in that more holistic approach. So it's combining environment, economy, and society to make sure that the improvements that we're making are felt in all of these areas. The idea being that it will become an exemplar for sustainable living more generally. Now, I'm just going to give you an example of some of the changes that we've made across time. So this is an area kind of right in the centre of the National Forest known as Hicks Lodge. And it is a really quite classic representation of what the landscape looked like before the nature regeneration began. So you've got this large area of old coal mine surrounded by relatively poor quality agricultural land. And so this is what this area looked like back in the late 90s. And through a series of interventions that have included supporting local landowners with grant applications, actually providing grants to certain areas, improving public access, we've actually managed to transform this area into a much more kind of natural, much more biodiversity friendly area. Now, one thing you'll probably notice is this area is not entirely covered by trees. And so while we do call ourselves the National Forest, what we're actually aiming to do is to create a mosaic of wildlife-friendly habitats. And so we have the forests, the woodlands, but also parklands, scrublands, any other appropriate habitats built into that, as well as allowing for public access, allowing for some of that woodland to be used in forestry so that there's an economic benefit. So it's really multifaceted project. Now, while these images are a very dramatic change visually from one to the other, they don't really provide any quantitative proof of what we've been doing in the area. And so then we want to come and think about, okay, well, how do we want to measure the progress of these projects? Now, when you look at forest creation as an example, the number of trees planted is often a very easy measure for what we've actually actively been doing. So the National Forest over the past 25 years have planted nearly 9 million trees. Now that as a standalone figure looks quite impressive, but because of the size of the area that we're working with, we were unable to create a baseline for that. We couldn't go out back in the early 90s and physically count all of the trees across that 200 square mile area. So yes, we have this amazing figure of 9 million trees, but we can't say whether that is a 10% increase in tree numbers or a 50% increase in tree numbers. And so we have to actually think a bit more carefully about other measures that can show this progress a bit more specifically. And for us, one of the ones that we use very regularly is actually percent forest cover, because this is something we were able to map even back in the mid-90s. So this map shows you the whole of the National Forest area, and the dark green areas are the forest cover. Now, just to clarify here, because we're aiming for that mosaic of different habitats within the landscape, this is not just woodland area. So this could be woodland, could be parkland, shrubland, all combined within this forest cover. So it's not directly comparable to things like the National Forest Inventory, but it's the measure that we use to show our progress of improving the area of natural habitat across this region. So back in 1995, we had 6% cover, and then as of 2020, that had increased to 21%. So this is a 250% increase in forest cover across the area. So it's a much more quantifiable statistic of the change that we have made across time. And we're able to do that because we had that baseline of what was it like before we started, before the interventions, before the tree planting. We were at 6%, and now we've got up to that 21%. But forest cover is not the only environmental measure that we use, and it's certainly not the only one that is relevant to the sites that we work in. So I'm going to talk through another couple of options as well, in terms of biodiversity and then also air quality. So biodiversity for us represents quite a big challenge because of the huge area that we're working in. It's very difficult for us, and it would be very costly for us to monitor biodiversity across the whole area. But we do use it in more local projects. So because we work with lots of different separate bits of land, we can concentrate on some of those and collect our biodiversity data there. So as I'm sure you're all aware, biodiversity monitoring encompasses lots of different taxa. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I know we've got a presentation specifically on biodiversity net gain a little bit later on. But I just wanted to show you how we have used biodiversity as a baseline data collection that also helps to inform what we're going to do on the site. So this is an example for us with a site that we sort of took on management of in 2020. So it's a very recent site for us. And it's in the kind of central south of the National Forest area. And so what we wanted to do as a baseline was perform a phase 1 habitat survey. So we've got a really detailed knowledge of the different habitats that were in the area. Also look at the protected species surveys and just generally have a very detailed ecological assessment of this area. And the results that came back for that were very, very informative. So a range of different habitats were identified. The majority was kind of semi-improved or neutral grasslands, so kind of old agricultural land. But we also found 3 habitats of principal importance. So that's really key because those are ones that need protection, they need potential enhancement, but they can generally just be left to themselves, whereas the grassland areas are the areas where we've got opportunity then for development and habitat improvement. In terms of the protected species that we found, there were foraging bats in the area, actually 3 badger sets, and also presence of great crested newts. We also did a nesting bird survey. We found 17 species. They weren't necessarily nesting in the area, but they were seen on the surveys, including 2 species of principal importance. So this information was very, very helpful, not only for providing that baseline of what have we got there to start with, It also then allowed us to work out how we were going to make our interventions. So which areas of this land could we actively plant, for instance, and which areas do we want to retain as habitats of principal importance. But then also it helps us to think about how we're going to monitor the progress of this site beyond the kind of planting of trees. And we're doing that through a biodiversity monitoring plan. So we've secured some funding to allow us to monitor how the biodiversity changes over the next 5 years. Things like amphibians obviously included so that we're getting a good idea of what's changing with the great crested newts. But we're also able to look at things like breeding birds and butterflies. And each of these surveys is done at different times of year, but also at different intervals, depending on how quickly we're expecting them to change. So by having that detailed baseline data, we can then plan our monitoring over the next few years. And then at the end of that 5 years, we'll have a really solid data set that shows how our interventions have made, hopefully, a positive effect on biodiversity on this site. Now, the last measure that I want to talk about is air quality. Now, this is one that has been actually quite in the news recently. Once you dig down past the kind of the COVID and the politics, there's been quite a lot in the news about air quality, about pollutants, about how pollutants can come from lots of different sources, not just kind of traffic, but it's also coming from kind of wood burning fires and things like that. And so air quality is something that, particularly if you're looking at it more holistically, this is obviously something that has a direct impact on the people in the area. So it could be something that when you're looking overall at improving the environment that you want to focus on. However, for us at the National Forest, because of the location and what we have in the area, it's unlikely we're going to be able to make a significant impact on air quality. So this map just shows you again the area of the National Forest, but I've highlighted the major roads that run through the forest. So you can see there's a number of roads that completely cut straight through, and a lot of these are big commuter roads. So you've got the M1, the A42, they get a lot of traffic along these roads. And we also are right next to East Midlands Airport, which, while is a small airport in terms of sort of passenger and tourism travel, is actually the largest cargo airport in the UK. Probably something to do with the big Amazon warehouse that's right next door, but there is a lot of air traffic that's coming in and out of East Midlands Airport. So realistically, we could plant all the trees that we want across this area until the air traffic and until the road traffic is dramatically reduced. It's unlikely we're going to have a big impact on air quality. So for us, that is a piece of data that's not necessarily useful in monitoring our impact on the area. So as you can see, one of the main challenges around baseline data is selecting an appropriate measure and making sure that you've taken all these different considerations into account. Is it useful for you? Is it linked in with what you're actually trying to change? And is it achievable to monitor it? And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to kind of see the wood for the trees. So if we're taking, again, kind of tree planting as an example, you know, that thing of, well, we're getting lots of trees into the ground. Great, but what is our overall outcome that we're wanting to get from that? And that's really where you want to be focusing when you're looking at collecting your baseline data and then monitoring through the years. So I hope that was interesting. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about what happens at the National Forest. If you'd like to find out more, you can always check out our website, nationalforest.org, or find us on social media, and my email address is at the bottom here. It's hgilbert@nationalforest.org. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. That was smashing. I mean, very, very rigorously designed bit of research was obviously, given my background, is something that makes me very happy indeed. So thank you for that. Okay, we'll move on to the next case study. This is a double act. We're going to have Mike Edwards, who is the Norfolk Farming Wildlife Advisory Group Business Manager, and Glenn Anderson from Dillington Hall The title is Using Biodiversity Net Gain to Drive Landscape Scale Change. So Mike and or Glenn, if you'd like to share your screen.
Just check everybody can hear me okay. Charlotte, if I start breaking up, let me know and I'll turn my camera off again. Like most people, I have children homeschooling at the moment, so we have challenges with a rural bandwidth. So my name is Glenn Anderson. I'm one of the principal landowners on this project, which is the Wendling Beck Exemplar Partnership. The Wendling Beck is a chalk-fed river just north of Dereham in Norfolk, and we've been working on this project for about 12 months now. So Mike, if you just flick on. I'm just going to give you a bit of context and background to this. So Lloyd talked a little bit about the challenges within the sort of farming environment at the moment. He also mentioned that they're hoping to sort of become a real beacon and inspire other landowners to kind of follow suit. And I guess we're probably the example of that. So we've got a huge admiration for what they're doing over at Ken Hill. We haven't got the kind of the natural beauty of the North Norfolk coast. We're sort of stuck in the middle of mid Norfolk, but that's that, we have advantages to that as well, which I'll come on to. In terms of overall sort of policy and context within farming, there's three key bills that are going through or sort of being implemented into law. So we obviously have the 25-year environment plan, which was brought in 2018, which was really about trying to leave the natural environment in a better state within a generation. It was really a series of sort of measures and targets, so there wasn't any kind of active policies within there. So the Environment Bill, which is winging its way through the House of Commons at the moment, is really looking at the policies which give the teeth to the 25-year environment plan. And there's various different policies within there. There's some excellent things within that bill. The one that we're really focusing on for our project is biodiversity net gain, and I'll come on to explain a little bit more about that. But at the same time, we also had the agriculture bill go through last year, and as Lloyd mentioned, the declining subsidies have really made us think as farmers and landowners, and kind of focused the minds on where we go in the future. We're kind of almost within a perfect storm of declining subsidies, gross margins being eroded, increased chemical and input bills, and lots of things coming together at the same time. So we started thinking quite hard about where our business was going in the future. We're just a small arable farm, typical mid-Norfolk arable farm, just north of Dereham. And we felt that the way things were going was not sustainable, either financially or environmentally. The soils were consistently declining. We've got a changing climate, and I think as farmers, we're probably more exposed to that changing climate than many other industries. And we started looking at what we could do to become more resilient, how we could work better with nature as opposed to consistently working against it, and looked at other projects like NEP, like Ken Hill, like some of the other sort of regen agriculture projects that are around, and wilding projects. And the Environment Bill and Biodiversity Net Gain really gave us an opportunity to focus on something a little bit different. So net gain really is a way of offsetting habitat loss within development sites. So it's working with developers to look at the habitat loss where house building or major infrastructure or construction projects are happening, and giving them a target to actually offset that, or there's a mitigation hierarchy that goes with it, but to try and offset that on site. But if that's not possible, and it's not always possible on a development site to make really kind of impactful ecological gains, then they can look to offset that within other local sites and as a means of last resort within a national, on a national scale. So as a landowner, that gives us an opportunity to work with developers to provide habitat and actually sell them offsetting measures, and the way that that policy works is around biodiversity units. So there's a metric in place which allows developers to understand the quantity of biodiversity units that will be lost, and we can use that same metric to apply that to habitat creation on local sites. Mike, if you flick on to the next slide. So that really gives us an opportunity to look at our business and look at it in a completely different way, and basically monetize the natural capital within the underlying assets of the land. So as I mentioned, we have low profitability, we've got increased reliance on agrochemicals and synthetics, we've got constant soil degradation, and that's impacted more with climate change. So from a rainfall perspective, the soils are washing off, they're not allowing infiltration through the soil. We don't have the availability of the water because the soil is not holding the water, and the climate is becoming more varied. So we tend to get either droughts or monsoons, and that's sort of evidenced by the wet winter that we've had this year and last year as well, and then the drought that we had last year, which again is impacting on the bottom line as well. So we really need to change the system. The NFU have been quite forward in committing to net zero by 2040 within agriculture, so that's another challenge for us. The carbon footprint of our existing business is fairly woeful when you actually start and look at that with the the huge amounts of chemical inputs that we have. There has to be a better way, and if it's not profitable, then a combination of regenerative agriculture and habitat creation with monetized natural capital in the mix is our solution out of where we are at the moment. So the Environment Bill should go through. It's been delayed a little bit. It's probably be the autumn now. It was due to go through in the spring 21. It was then pushed back to the summer, and it's now gone back a bit further. Within biodiversity net gain, there is a true 2-year transition. So once that bill becomes law, mandatory net gain won't be on the horizon for 2 years after that. But even with that timetable, as farmers, that will be on the ground before any of the ELMS scheme come in. So ELMS is the key sort of flagship policy, which is replacing subsidies. So we feel this is a great opportunity for us. We're keen to get going. We've been working very hard with Norfolk Flag, who Mike represents, Norfolk Rivers Trust, and some of the other key catchment stakeholders around this area. And we're really looking at a project that kind of brings together different natural capital and ecosystem services and stacks them to try and create revenue from the underlying assets of the land. We also want to continue to deliver some form of food production within that project area as well. So we are looking at a regenerative system. We have been speaking to Ken Hill. They're sort of much further down the line than we are. But that's something that we will look to bring in because of the approach that we're taking within the habitat management. We need to bring livestock into the project area. We don't have any livestock at all at the moment. And that gives us the ability to kind of interweave that with a regenerative solution as well. Bundling and stacking of ecosystem services is a kind of a new term. I think we will look back and in years to come sort of see that as the kind of the dawn of a new way of working with land management. I also think I saw there was a question on one of the Q&A panels around the profitability of regenerative agriculture. I think in years to come we will look back and regen agriculture will be mainstream, and there will be a big shift. I think it is a much more profitable way of farming. It's a different way of farming. It will take time to change, but there's huge potential there as from a financial resilience point of view. But we have to make that step from an environmental resilience point of view as well. Mike, if you just flick on. So the Wendenbeck project, we started about a year ago. The first lockdown gave us an opportunity to really focus on this. The policy came out at the right time for us. We are principally made up of 4 farmer landowners. It's a project area of about 2,000 acres, just under 2,000 acres. It's a nice ring fence block. And where we're different from some of the other projects that are happening is we are really a collaboration of different landowners. So the 4 farmers make up the biggest block of land. We also have the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, who have a land holding through the centre of the project, and Norfolk County Council, who have a museum and model farm within the area as well. We're working hard with the Norfolk Rivers Trust and Norfolk FWAG. They're really our sort of holding our hand all the way through this. But we're also supported by the Nature Conservancy, so they've really been quite phenomenal in the way that they've mentored us, and they've got global experience. If you're not aware, the Nature Conservancy are a big American nature NGO, and they've really been helping us around how these kind of projects have been delivered in other parts of the world, and bringing that experience to the fore. We are also one of the Natural England Net Gain Credit Scheme pilots, so we're working hard with Natural England to make sense of this policy. We're obviously quite early adopters within this. There's only 9 pilots through the UK at the moment. And the relationship with the Norfolk County Council also gives us quite a lot of opportunities from a kind of a visitor and public access and social impact point of view as well. So it really gives us the opportunity to bring the public into the project area. As I say, we're kind of right in the middle of Norfolk. So Norfolk and Suffolk County Councils have just completed something called the Norfolk and Suffolk Natural Capital Compendium, which is really a natural capital account of the whole of those 2 counties, and it's a parallel to the government's 25-year environment plan. So we are working with them to see how that can be rolled out to deliver within those counties. Now, within Norfolk, we have the Brecks and the Broads and the North Norfolk coast, which are all areas of outstanding natural beauty, and we're kind of in the white space in the middle. So whilst we don't have the underlyings of almost national park status in some ways, we are to some extent more important because those areas are already protected. We've got some fabulous habitat, and we occupy that white space in the middle. By being a collaboration and bringing different farmers and landowners together, it also gives us an opportunity to define a new model where, working in collaboration with each other, you can create something much better and much bigger, and really deliver at a landscape scale. Whereas myself as a farmer on 500 acres wouldn't have that impact. So it really allows you to deliver those economies of scale from a nature perspective, and create something much better, which is much more impactful than the individual component parts of the different landholdings. We are quite keen to really try and create some form of social impact within here, and there's a few ways that we can do that. So bringing people into the project area through cycling and walking. The COVID pandemic has really changed the way that our footpath network is used. We've seen a lot more people coming into the land, and we would like to open that up for recreation. We connect some of the public footpaths and Norfolk trails as well. We've got the Nile Valley Way and the Wenton Way actually connecting within the project area. and it gives us an opportunity to actually sort of further extend that and make some real connectivity, which brings people into some areas that they wouldn't necessarily get to see otherwise. And with the Norfolk Museum of Rural Life at Gresson Hall, it allows us to build on that existing education program as well. So we can, they've got an excellent schools program in place. We just add additionality to that, and we can bring people in and actually bring them over into the project area and share some of the learnings. By being a net gain pilot and sort of focusing around biodiversity net gain, there is an emphasis on constant monitoring and measuring of the success from a habitat and biodiversity perspective. So, we can share those learnings. It also gives us the ability to work with some of the support partners that the council have to help us actually deliver some of that thinking. We're also working with Anglian Water. We have a sewage works within the project area. It's in quite a challenging position as it is. It's built within the floodplain. It floods regularly. It's a real problem for Anglian Water. There are issues with, as most sewage works, with the discharge from that, the outfall from the sewage works as well. So we are looking to the possibilities around a project of some form of constructed wetland to improve that water quality coming out of the sewage works, and also with a flood mitigation strategy to stop the sewage works flooding so regularly as well. We're also working with John Innes Centre in Norwich to create a nursery for disease-resistant ash and elm trees. So we will create a seed bank for them. It's a long-term project. The trees should be planted out next winter, so probably about a year from now. They've gone through and they've mapped all of the disease-resistant ash and elm trees in Norfolk and Suffolk, and propagated those ready to plant out. So they've done all the hard work. We will provide the land for that, fence it, irrigate it, and we will incorporate that as part of our net gain and natural capital offer. I mentioned the stacking of the ecosystem services. Although we are principally focused around net gain, we are also looking at carbon sequestration, and carbon's quite a complex one. And again, it's an early market. It breaks down into three broad categories, which is operational carbon, so the reduction in the carbon footprint of the businesses, the above ground carbon around tree planting mainly and sort of woody areas, and then the soil-based carbon, which it probably has the most potential, but is the most difficult to actually measure and capture. The above ground carbon market is becoming more established. There is a framework in place for the Woodland Carbon Code. There isn't anything in place at the moment around the soil-based carbon, but we will be working to try and at least explore the voluntary market within that respect. And again, it kind of links quite well because we're doing all of the baseline surveys as part of the strategy for net gain. There are some kind of synergies between all the different overlapping areas of ecosystem service as well. We're also obviously working with Anglian Water on the sewage works and the water quality side of things. So that's where we are. I'm going to hand over to Mike, who's going to talk you through a little bit about the landscape design and master planning that we're going through. It's a big project. It's taken more time than I think we would ever have anticipated. It's far more complex than we would have anticipated, but it's hugely exciting. We're 100% committed to it. We should be going through, we are going through a process over the next probably 3 months where we start to do the condition assessments and really start to make some big inroads on the master plan with a view to becoming market ready next year. So I'll hand over to Mike and he'll talk you through some of the technical aspects and where we are with the master plan design.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Glenn. I hope you'll excuse me just leaving my video off. I might be pushing my broadband a little bit too far to be screen sharing and video this morning. As Richard said, I'm Mike Edwards and I run the Norfolk Farming and Wildlife Advice Group. We provide conservation advice to about sort of 300 farmers across Norfolk. A lot of that has historically been around sort of agri-environment advice, but obviously we're also very interested in what is possible through biodiversity net gain. As Glenn said, I'm just going to try and give you a little bit more detail about the project area and hopefully really bring it to life. So just the technical aspects, you can just see on the right hand side of this slide here, these are some of the biodiversity metric UK HAB maps that have been produced for the project. And you can see it gets fairly complicated when you're working on sort of 2,000 acres as to what that looks like. We're in these sort of two different technical work streams at the moment. We've been establishing the baselines and we've got some natural capital work going on. We're starting to move into a phase where we're really starting to think about, well, what habitats should we be creating? What species can we support on the project area? And that will probably take us through till sort of later on in the year. And hopefully we're going to be market ready, as Glenn said, from sort of September, October onwards. I'm going to go extra high tech now and see if I can use the laser pointer on the screen just to see if I can just sort of bring the project area to life a little bit for you. Don't imagine a huge number of you know Norfolk particularly well, but just down in the bottom right hand corner we've got Dereham, which is a market town, and it's just on the A47, the sort of main road that runs right across Norfolk just to the south. We've got the Museum of Rural Life that Glenn was talking about. It's just up here in the top, just next to the small village of Beatley. And the Wendling Beck, which is a chalk stream. It's a tributary of the River Wensum, which is a SAC and SSI river, wiggles its way all the way down through the project area. We're really lucky to have 3 triple SIs. We've got Beatley and Hoe Rough at the top here, and we've got Dillington Carr triple SI in the middle here. And then we've got Dereham Rush Meadows, which actually sits all around in here and actually just out the back of the sewage works. All the triple SIs in the project area currently in an unfavourable recovering condition, and we've got a real range of habitats as well. We've got unimproved wet grassland and patches of fen vegetation in some of these areas here and up here, and a few little patches you can still see through the middle here. And we've got acid grassland and some small heathland patches as well. Some large areas of alder-carr woodland, and also a few small dots of reed bed as well located down in the valley. We haven't got any current bird records. It's something that we've sort of got on our list to try and establish as part of our baseline work this year. But old records from the site are for snipe and lapwing, sedge and reed warblers, and the open water areas in Dillington Carr, which is in here, have got old records for gadwall and pochard, tufted duck, shoveler, great crested grebe, kingfisher, which is really great. And then some of the woodland areas, we've also got records for barn owl, little owl, lesser spotted woodpecker, and also willow tit and nuthatch. So we have got some really quite special species using this central spine of the project area. We've got a number of woodlands. We've got this one here is Old Carr. This is a patch of ancient woodland. And we've also got these woodlands over here, which form part of what was the formal parkland for Gorgate Hall, which is sadly no longer there, but would have been where the pointer is right now. As Glenn mentioned, it's a fairly sort of normal Norfolk farming rotation, really. There's lots of cereals in there, oilseed rape. You can see the land has in the past had outdoor pigs over here. There's also been potatoes, and you might just be able to make out, oh, it's a little faint, but these rows here are actually, yeah, quite a serious blackcurrant growing operation going into Ribena. The soils are a real mixture. There's lighter, sandier soils, certainly up this end of the other farms, and then we've got some heavier pockets around over here in particular. And then we also actually have the chalk coming quite close to the surface here. So that's really great having such a good range of soil types. That does give us a lot of opportunity when it comes to thinking about restoration and habitat creation. In terms of livestock and how some of this land is being managed at the moment, there's actually very little livestock, and actually none of the landowners actually own their own livestock at the moment. There's a few sheep that come through and graze these areas here and over this side, and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust have a few White Park cattle that they graze on deer and rush meadows, but it really is only sort of five or six beasts. There is a really good network of hedgerows across the arable land. It's a little bit difficult to see on here, and actually quite a lot of this has been planted over the last sort of 20 years by the landowners through agri-environment schemes. Just to give you a kind of idea of the wildness of some of this valley, this is an aerial shot of Dillington Carr SSI, where you can make out the big lake. You can see the Wendling Beck, the chalk stream, just running and meandering its way down the side. So there is already some really pretty. Now, I'm sure some of you on the call are probably familiar with looking at master plans for housing developments, and some of these rectangular blocks in here would be the layout where all the new houses were going to be laid out. But this one is a bit different. This is a master plan we're developing for how we can restore this piece of landscape. And restore that by selling biodiversity units. We really are here, I think, looking more at a managed conservation project. We're looking to rebalance nature and farming. We think it's important to still grow some food. Some of this land has been farmed for a very, very long time. So we're trying to identify the best bits of arable land, which we'll keep farming, and then trying to also be led by the ecology and see what is the best habitat we could create in other areas over the long term. And what's quite interesting is once you have a blank canvas to work with, it's actually not always that easy to agree what the best outcomes might be in terms of habitat. So we're actually working with the project partners and local experts to just sort of workshop what we really think the best habitats are we could be working towards. You see, we maintain that strong north-south corridor through the project area, and what we're looking to do is really buffer and expand those existing habitats and allow a sort of more of a blur between, where the farming might take place and where nature will be, and allowing nature to spread up through the landscape. You see a lot more trees. There's certainly an ambition to try and join up and increase the size and scope of those existing woodlands, and also more scattered trees into the landscape as well. We've identified a couple of areas where we think we have huge potential for wetland creation. So one's down the bottom here, next to the sewage works. We think this could be, as Glenn mentioned, a constructed wetland, and we may also be able to polish the outflow water from the sewage works. We also think we've got a good opportunity up here this is the Park stream, to essentially almost block off the bottom of the valley and create a series of wetland habitats here as well. River restoration. The river is a chalk stream, but sadly it's been heavily modified in many places and runs a very straight, essentially almost like a canal. So working with Norfolk Rivers Trust, who are a key partner in the project, we're looking to undertake about 5.6 kilometres of river restoration to hopefully add some more interest into these rather straightened sections and use them to create some backwaters. Just like at Ken Hill, we're very much looking to embrace the regenerative farming practices. We see that as really important. Lloyd had a much better slide than I've got on regenerative farming, but it really is around that sort of reducing soil disturbance and keeping living roots in the soil as much as possible. Getting a greater diversity of crops and getting livestock back into the rotation. We think this will lead to a massive reduction in inorganic fertilizers, will increase the fertility and the carbon within the soil, and we should also reduce the use of crop protection chemicals. We think that combination of habitat creation and regenerative farming will lead to water quality improvements across the whole catchment. You can imagine all of this land is pretty much draining into the Wendling Beck. So as we can reduce our inputs into that land, hand more of it over to nature, and slow the filtration of water through the land and back into the river, it should have really significant impacts on water quality. You can see lots of ponds on here, dotted through here. You know, we're a founder member of the Norfolk Ponds project as well, which you might have heard of, which is doing sort of landscape scale pondscapes across Norfolk. So we're going to be looking for every opportunity we can to slot some more ponds into the landscape, as there's some fantastic research being done by UCL about just, you know, these ponds become almost like the sort of biodiversity and insect sort of chimneys, pumping out invertebrates into the countryside, which then support, as you know, a huge range of farmland birds and bat species. Some of you may have spotted we've got a new additional east-west corridor across the project area, which isn't there on the aerial shot at the moment. We've actually got the Vattenfall cable route going through for an offshore wind turbines. What we've decided to do, instead of asking them to put that cable route back down to arable land, is we're actually just going to embrace it and create a new 50-metre wide corridor across the project area. Our intention is to hedge it up on both sides, sow it down to a wildflower mix, and use it as a grazing corridor to move livestock east-west across the project area, along with, obviously, we have a north-south corridor as well. I mentioned how few livestock there are in the sort of farm landscape at the moment. We're expecting to see a huge increase in the livestock required through the scheme. That we think, you know, we're going to need them to manage the habitats better, and we're going to have a lot more habitat to manage. So they're going to become absolutely integral to this, and they also fit very nicely into the regenerative farming principles, where we can bring them in on the crops there, and that will really help sort of close the system, if you like. We feel we've got a really exciting project we're developing here. We have had some fantastic support from both Natural England and the Nature Conservancy, and we really do think that the net gain offsetting is going to be really important as we go forward. We're really thinking about a habitat bank is where our thinking is at the moment. Great potential within the project. We've got the scale, and we've also got the local partnership and the right local partners involved to move the scheme towards a habitat bank type model. We think from some of our financial modelling, this would then allow us to, you know, biodiversity credits, when they're sold, it's to create habitat for 30 years. We really want to move beyond that and be creating habitat in perpetuity. And we think that a habitat bank structure will allow us to do this. We're not sure there's a huge amount of point in going to all of this effort to create habitat for just 30 years if we can find a structure that allows us to do that in perpetuity. I just wanted to mention as well, this is my last slide, that Glenn and I are here today very much as spokespeople for the project. And as Glenn said, this is a very open and collaborative project. Must mention the other partners, which I probably have done already, but Norfolk Rivers Trust and Norfolk County Council and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and the support of the Nature Conservancy. But I just wanted to add that maybe most importantly, we wouldn't be this far with this project without the landowners and open-minded and enthusiastic landowners who are looking to do their bit for nature recovery. And I just kind of wanted to stress that point, because I'm sure we all have very good ambitions for what we'd like to achieve and for the nature recovery we want to see, but we mustn't underestimate how important relationships and involvement with landowners and farmers will be in that. And I just wanted to leave you with the quote on there from Dieter Helm, because I think that sums up very neatly what we're trying to achieve with this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike and Glenn. A very complementary project to the other ones that are going on, I'd say, and very much the business of the nature partnerships. So thank you for that. We're now in the question and answer session from the morning talks. Charlotte, do you want to explain how this is going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. So Luke from the GLNP team is going to take over in terms of questions. I think he's been having a look at what's been coming in. So I'll hand over to Luke in a second. I think we've had a list of questions come through that are directed towards certain people. So yeah, we'll try and handle the questions from this morning, because I don't think all the speakers can hang around till this afternoon. So we'll handle all of those. Saying that, if people have questions later on in the day, just keep typing them. If we don't manage to cover everything, we will follow up with email or in the newsletter. But yeah, I'll just hand over to Luke, if that's okay.
Hi, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, so I'm going to be doing my best Jeremy Paxman impression and trying to put some of these questions across that have been coming in. The first one is for Lloyd and about Ken Hill. It's actually an amalgamation of two questions. Really, everyone seems to be really interested about the project, but quite interested specifically in the regenerative agriculture and whether it's financially viable and providing profits, and whether how important the government support is going to be going forwards.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think as Glenn was saying earlier, you know, it's certainly a very different style of farming, and it's one that we're having to adapt to. And actually, I kind of always look at it and think that we're probably actually coming full circle and farming more how we did prior to sort of certainly the First and Second World War, and certainly a lot lower impact. But yeah, when it comes to what we're doing, yes, we see an additional decrease in sort of yields, but actually, you know, our overheads and things also drop. So we reach this sort of balance whereby, yes, it is financially viable, and almost certainly the way forward with things. So yeah, I hope that answers that in depth enough.
Okay, thanks very much. Another one while we're talking to you, Lloyd. So how important has historical records for wildlife been, and has it influenced how you've seen the potential for recovery? Yeah,
so the historical records, so thankfully to Graham, when he did his the work that he did for us early on with setting up a lot of our baseline data, he clawed back through the local record centre and tried to pull out as many records for the area. So there are records going back, but with it being a private estate and shut off for quite some time, it's, you know, the actual historical records are few and far between when you start looking into it. So anything that is there plays a massive important part. We're very fortunate that we have lots of other organisations and groups that we work very closely with, people like the Wash Wader Ringing Group and groups like that, whereby they have used estate land and we have access to sort of vast amounts of their data and work for certain species anyway. But yeah, records are one of those things that are just so important, because without it you can't make any sound judgments moving forward. So yeah, we're always looking at historical records and everything moving how things are changing.
Fantastic. And one for Mike now, just a quick question about the project you've just described to us and how you're monitoring water quality and other water parameters.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that my colleagues at Norfolk Rivers Trust would be probably much more able to answer, as they're focusing on the watery habitats. But yeah, we've done quite a lot of work on habitats so far, and that's been driven by the biodiversity metric, but we're playing a bit of catch up when it comes to species. And again, the habitat metric doesn't pick up water quality, it picks up morphology of the river, I think. So we will be doing a lot more work on that. I think there is some informal water testing going on, and obviously with the sewage works there is also a bit of formal work being done by Anglian Water. But it's something we're going to do a bit more on over the next 12 months, I think.
Yeah, we have been sort of informally water testing for the past couple of years, so we have got some baseline data. The UEA are involved in part of that kind of wider Wensum catchment strategy. So, you know, we've got something to build on, but as we go through the process, we will tighten that up, and you know, we will look to put sort of formal water testing in place, whether that's real-time monitoring or whether that's just periodic sampling. I'm not sure, but it'd definitely be part of the strategy.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Another quick question about, well, water-based, I guess, for Mike and Glenn, but also anyone else who might have some sort of answer for this. Is there a presence of, specifically talking about Mike and Glenn's project, is there a presence of greater crested newt within the site? And then sort of more widely, would ponds created be used as compensation ponds within district level licensing?
I imagine newts are. Well, again, we don't have any records at the moment. We haven't, but they could be. The ponds could be part of DLL. I am involved in that through the Norfolk Ponds project, and we have been creating quite a series of ponds. So, yeah, there could be overlap between these two aspects. It's really interesting how all these things will fit together. Do you want a pond to be paid for by biodiversity net gain, or DLL, or stewardship, or elms? There's quite a bit to work out between how this all fits together. I certainly don't think we should be paid multiple times for the same bit of habitat creation. But there is still a fair bit to be flushed out, I think, on how this will all mesh together in the future.
Brilliant, absolutely understandable that. One question, I think this is for Lloyd, but I suppose if any of the other projects have anything to say about this, it could be pertinent for them. So do you incorporate or take into account historic landscapes and the archaeological sites in your land management plans?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, without going back into the presentation, but there's certain areas on our land that we've had to be very sensitive about the land use and the way that we've done it, or what's in the rewilding area and what's not, because we have several sites of historic importance. So we've had to play that into our management plan and how we proceed with that in the future. So yeah, there's several parcels that we've not been able to enter into what we wanted to do.
Fantastic stuff. Sorry,
I was just going to add to that and say, yeah, absolutely. That again, same for us. That's something we look at as a matter of course. Really lucky having Norfolk County Council involved, and their historic environment record team is actually in Gresson Hall, which is almost basically in the project area. So that's been very helpful. And one of the things we actually spotted when we were doing some of that research on historic maps was an area of old heathland called Stanton Heath within the project area. So that is an area that we're going to look at targeting for heathland restoration over the long term. So it's an absolutely vital resource to helping you make sort of current decisions, looking at past land uses.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question for Heather. What plans do you have to build natural regeneration into the expansion of the National Forest?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, we would definitely love to bring natural regeneration, kind of rewilding, that kind of thing in. The block at the moment is, because we work again with landowners, there's a lot about what the other projects are talking about. We need to find the funding to encourage those landowners to be involved with the project. And traditionally that has come through kind of forestry, or it's come through, things that are associated with kind of these active interventions. They're associated with tree planting and things like that. And as yet, there's not quite such a kind of strong push towards funding to make it economically viable for individual landowners to do some natural regeneration and rewilding purely on their land. So we are looking at different options for that. And it's something we're definitely investigating more as we try and sort of blend the different habitats together across the landscape. But it's just, yeah, different challenges with the fact that we're trying to encourage landowners who already use their land for different reasons to input into that project.
Fantastic. Next question is for Heather again. So the question is, do you monitor national surveys in your area? So for example, the RSPB, Big Garden Watch, and the like, to look at landscape scale effects and trends?
Yes, again, this is one where I would say we try to, but we come across some barriers. One of the issues that we find is, so when the outline of the National Forest was set up, it was set up using natural barriers. So the outline goes along rivers or it goes along valleys, etc., which is great and makes perfect ecological sense. But when you're looking at national level data, they often cross those barriers. So we are working with an area that has some sections that are completely within it, some are half and half, some we might come into. So it does present a challenge. So we do look at that data, but it is a bit of a challenge with actually finding the data that's just appropriate to us and getting that to show what's happening just within our area.
Brilliant, thank you, that's amazing. Another question now for Mike and Glenn. How does the aim of increasing numbers of livestock balance with the trends towards reduced meat consumption, lower prices for livestock, and goals of reduced methane production? Prices, I think that, lower prices for livestock, I think that was.
So do you want me to answer this, Mike?
Yeah, you go for it.
It seems about a bit counterintuitive with everything that you read, but our view is that methane particularly is a little bit of a red herring, because methane dissipates over time within the atmosphere. So you know, that number isn't continually increasing with increased livestock. Also, within a regenerative system, you actually are taking methane back into the soil, and you know, obviously from a carbon point of view, it has huge benefits as well. So when you really start to look at a well-managed system, livestock can actually be part of the solution around climate change as well, and that's becoming better documented. It doesn't get the press that it probably should do, but certainly with a properly managed system and mob grazing, and you know, really sort of looking after the soils and integrating livestock into that system, there's a rich balance to be found there. There's a sweet spot that we think that we can achieve.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so the next question is going back to Lloyd again. You mentioned during your presentation about the reintroduction of the white-tailed eagle. There's a question just wondering whether it was definitely going ahead following the recent consultation.
Okay, yeah, so obviously, hopefully many of you took part in that public consultation. So that is part and parcel of the feasibility report that we've had to put together. That's had a lot of time and effort gone into it. So we have submitted the feasibility now to Natural England. So we will await for Natural England, that's towards our, hopefully our gaining the license to be able to do it. So hopefully Natural England are working fast away on this now as we speak. And yeah, we'll see what the outcome is, hopefully a positive one for the project.
That's great, thanks so much. Back to the top. So I have just one question now for Mike, but this might also actually suit Ken Hill project as well. It's about how would you establish and manage the species-rich grassland areas?
Yeah, so we're still in discussion about how we're going to approach this. I think we're going to go for a mixture of approaches with some natural regeneration and maybe slightly helped natural regeneration. We may be looking at green hay. We may be looking at some plug planting. We're also thinking around maybe some sown swards as well. So, you know, we're going to take a kind of a mixture of approaches, I think, towards achieving that on our scheme.
Yes, I think similar for Ken Hill, we're still experimenting very much with ways that we can look at the species-rich grasslands and what we can do. We have several areas on the regenerative agriculture side that we'll be looking at using, where we can use livestock for winter grazing, and then yeah, other methods for spring and summer management. So yeah,